You won't believe how one of the most humiliating moments in her life, getting fired in front of her entire office, turned into the greatest comeback anyone could imagine. On Friday, she was escorted out of the building like a criminal. But by Monday morning, she walked back in as the new owner. Her name was Alina Grant. At 29, she was just another ambitious employee trying to climb the corporate ladder. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't political, and she definitely wasn't a favorite of upper management. But what she lacked in office politics, she made up for in relentless work ethic. She came in early, left late, and often picked up projects others had already given up on. Alina worked as a senior project analyst at Grayson & Locke, a mid-sized consulting firm that prided itself on smart growth and loyalty. At least, that's what the posters on the break room wall claimed. But after 7 years of loyalty, she would discover just how hollow those words really were. It all started with a client file. One small, supposedly costly mistake. On a Tuesday morning, Alina submitted a report that had a minor discrepancy in the projections. She realized the error within minutes and sent a corrected version. The client hadn't even noticed, but her manager, Darren, was waiting for a reason, any reason, to push her out. He had been slowly replacing senior team members with his own people, and Alina had refused to play along. By Friday, Darren called her into the conference room. There were 2 people sitting across the table. One of them was from HR. The other, Darren himself, didn't even look up as she entered. They told her she was being let go immediately due to performance concerns and a lack of strategic alignment. She tried to explain. She tried to ask questions, but they handed her a white envelope, avoided eye contact, and asked her to pack her things. No goodbyes, no chance to speak. As she walked out carrying a cardboard box, everything inside her wanted to break down. 7 years. Just like that. But something shifted inside her that night. Call it rage. Call it clarity. Call it the voice of every ignored instinct finally screaming to be heard. Whatever it was, Alina didn't cry. She didn't call her friends to vent. She went home, opened her laptop, and started researching everything she knew about Grayson & Locke. Because while she had no position, no paycheck, and no allies left inside the building, Alina had something far more valuable: knowledge. She had been on nearly every major account in the past 4 years. She knew which contracts were unstable, which clients were unhappy, and most importantly, she knew that the company was running out of time. Grayson & Locke was in financial trouble, serious trouble. 2 years earlier, they had expanded too quickly and borrowed heavily. Several internal proposals from Alina warning them to scale back had been ignored. She knew the numbers. She had run the risk models herself. If they didn't secure a new cash injection soon, they would default on 2 major vendor agreements within the quarter. And that's when a wild idea struck her. What if she bought the company? The thought sounded absurd. She didn't come from money. She had no investor connections. Her savings account couldn't even cover 3 months of rent. But what she did have was leverage, and information that no outside buyer would have. All weekend, she barely slept. She compiled every report, every memo, every client complaint she'd saved in her email drafts. Then she made a list of private equity firms that specialized in turnaround acquisitions. Most of them ignored her, but one didn't. Silveric Ventures, a firm known for snapping up struggling mid-tier companies and flipping them into profit machines. She sent them a concise pitch. Grayson & Locke is losing control of its balance sheet. You don't have much time. I can show you how to fix it and who's causing the damage from the inside. Silveric called her within an hour. By Sunday afternoon, she was sitting in their Manhattan office, walking 3 partners through a detailed diagnosis of the company's downfall. She showed them how internal mismanagement, particularly under Darren's leadership, was accelerating client churn. She showed them the patchwork of debt the company had taken on. Then she presented a blueprint for restoring trust, keeping key clients, and restructuring the leadership. But she made one thing clear. She wasn't just giving them a cheat sheet. If they wanted the plan, she came with it. As CEO. It was a bold move. They could have easily copied her insights and walked away. But they didn't. The level of insider clarity she provided was something no outsider could replicate. and the speed at which the collapse was coming made it too risky to stall. By Sunday night, Silveric agreed to fund a 51% acquisition of Grayson and Locke, with Alina Grant named interim CEO. On Monday morning, she walked through the front doors of the company that had fired her. Only now, she wasn't carrying a cardboard box. She was followed by legal counsel, a restructuring team, and a memo that sent shockwaves through the building. Darren was out. 3 senior executives were suspended pending investigation, and all employees were required to attend a 9 a.m. all-hands meeting. When Alina stepped on stage in front of the same people who had seen her escorted out just 3 days earlier, she didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "I know some of you are shocked to see me, but I'm not here to relive the past. I'm here to fix what's broken. You can either help rebuild this company or stand in the way. I won't ask twice." The room fell silent. Then someone started clapping, then another, and another. In just 72 hours, Alina had gone from disposable to irreplaceable, but her journey was just beginning. She spent the next 6 weeks overhauling the company's operations. The marketing department was restructured. Wasteful spending was cut. Client retention became a daily metric, not just a quarterly target. She held one-on-one meetings with team leads. She reinstated 2 analysts who had been wrongfully demoted, and she rebuilt trust brick by brick. But the pressure didn't stop. Investors wanted weekly updates. Competitors were circling like vultures. The media caught wind of the leadership shakeup, and industry blogs speculated whether this fired employee turned CEO would survive the next quarter. Alina knew the numbers would be her only armor, and she delivered. By Q2, client retention had stabilized. By Q3, the firm posted its first profit in over a year. And by the end of the fiscal year, Grayson and Locke was not only back in the black, it had signed 2 major government contracts that would secure its future for the next 5 years. She had done it. But Alina never let the success get to her head. She didn't buy a fancy car. She didn't give herself a massive bonus. Instead, she started a new internal program, the Redemption Fund. Every quarter, a portion of profits would go toward retraining and mentoring employees who had been overlooked or pushed out unfairly, just like she had been. And the first person she hired through that program was a woman named Natalie, a former receptionist who had been laid off during cost-cutting and had started coding in her spare time. Within 6 months, Natalie became one of their top junior developers. Alina's story became more than just a comeback. It became a blueprint for modern leadership, one rooted in resilience, data, and empathy. She proved that loyalty isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, especially when no one's watching. And through it all, she kept one thing pinned to the wall of her office, that same white envelope they handed her when she was fired, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of your greatest chapter. Alina knew success wasn't a destination. It was a fight every single day. The first year after taking control of Grayson and Locke was a blur of meetings, board calls, late-night audits, and emergency pivots. There was no roadmap. There were no guarantees. But she had one thing that her predecessors didn't, a personal stake in the outcome. She wasn't just cleaning up someone else's mess. She was rebuilding her dignity, piece by piece. The culture shift was the most difficult part. Years of toxic leadership had left employees suspicious, quiet, defensive. People didn't speak up in meetings. Ideas died before they were voiced. Departments operated in silos, protecting their turf instead of collaborating. So Alina did something radical. She removed the corner offices. Literally, she tore down the executive floor and rebuilt it as an open space. She removed title plates from desks. She introduced anonymous voting on major internal changes. And once a month, she invited 2 random employees to shadow her for an entire day, from client calls to budgeting meetings to investor presentations. "Transparency breeds trust," she said, "and I want trust more than fear." It worked. Slowly, then suddenly. People who had once kept their heads down began speaking up. Departments cross-trained. Errors were spotted earlier. Clients began sending feedback, not just complaints but praise. And yet, even as the company stabilized, Elena faced constant whispers. She's too young, too emotional, too inexperienced. This is a fluke. She ignored the noise until one day it came from inside. 6 months into her leadership, 2 board members tried to oust her. They believed the turnaround phase was complete, and now it was time for experienced leadership to take over. In their words, someone with a more traditional pedigree. Elena didn't flinch. She gathered her wins, the profit turnaround, the signed contracts, the employee retention numbers that had nearly doubled. But more importantly, she gathered her people. The next board meeting didn't just include executives. It included 5 non-manager employees, each of whom gave a 5-minute presentation on how the new culture had changed their work, their motivation, and in some cases, their entire lives. It was unconventional, and it worked. The board vote failed. Elena stayed, and the dissenting members quietly resigned within the month, but the close call shook her. It reminded her that power is only ever borrowed. Influence is earned and must be re-earned every day, so she doubled down. She launched the Phoenix Initiative, a bold expansion plan to offer small business consulting to underserved communities. Instead of chasing only big clients, Grayson and Locke began allocating 25% of its service hours to local entrepreneurs, especially those led by minorities, immigrants, or people with prior incarceration histories. Within a year, they had helped over 100 new businesses get off the ground. And a surprising side effect followed. Many of those businesses, when they grew, came back to Grayson and Locke as paying clients. The expansion effort paid for itself, both financially and reputationally. Elena also launched a podcast, Fired to Founder. She interviewed people who had been publicly rejected or laid off, authors, teachers, engineers, veterans, and how those moments became the spark of their greatest successes. The podcast quickly hit the top charts in the business category. It was raw, emotional, and real, just like her story. But not everything was victory. Midway through year 2, her mother passed away, quietly, without fanfare. Elena took a 2-week leave, her first real pause since the takeover. And in that stillness, she realized something terrifying. She didn't know who she was without the fight. Success had become her identity. Control had become her comfort, and grief doesn't play by business rules. She returned to work with a new question at the center of her mission. Not how do I fix this company, but how do I make sure no one feels as alone as I did on that Friday I was fired? The next month, she implemented mandatory mental wellness check-ins. Managers were trained not just in performance evaluation, but in empathy, conflict resolution, and trauma-informed leadership. It wasn't a PR move. It was survival for everyone. Employees began to stay longer. Sick days dropped. Productivity rose. But more importantly, people began to say, "This is the first place I've ever worked where I feel safe." Elena's story reached global headlines when a Forbes article titled, "The Woman Who Bought the Company That Fired Her," went viral. She became a keynote speaker at tech conferences, business schools, and even prisons. She was featured in Time 100 Women of Impact and was offered a 7-figure book deal, which she turned down. "I'm not done writing my story yet," she said, and still she kept the white envelope. It sat in a frame just behind her desk. The contents still inside, her termination letter, a folded list of items she had left behind, a meal voucher they gave her as compensation for the inconvenience. Not once did she open it again, because she didn't need to. The envelope was never about the words inside. It was a symbol of everything broken, of everything rebuilt, of the fire that tried to consume her and the spark that made her rise. Elena Grant wasn't just a CEO. She was a movement. And her story remains a reminder to every person who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, fired, or underestimated, that your value isn't defined by what they take from you. It's defined by what you do when they try. Because sometimes, getting fired on Friday is just the beginning of owning Monday.